Better? Okay. My
better.
question is to you. So I couldn't understand your key target. So do you want to develop a new machine translation engine, or do you want to use the existing translation engines? And then, because most of the technologies, what you have in your presentation is already done concerning the front end. So like the multimodal or front-end services like mobile services concerning translation. So
yeah, it's a good question. We think that progress in machine translation can be characterized to some extent to first approximation in terms of these 4 dimensions, which we call key performance impact factors. And we would like to make sure that the project is not sort of like completely biased from the outset, because we don't know which one is going to win. Like if you look at the disruptive new approaches, for example, I mentioned this sort of like, the strawman scenario of trying to model cognitive processes in the head of a human translator or something like that computationally. If you have such a potentially new disruptive technology, during the first year or 2, such a technology might actually underperform if you look at the translation quality or productivity curves here. But we would like to have it as part of the project for this to have a chance to come through. While at the same time making sure that improvements of core components of models that we already have, like people for the long tail phenomena have been working on hierarchical Pitman neural processes, for example, but it hasn't brought the success that we would like to have yet. But that doesn't mean that this is not going to happen. So we'd like to have that possibility, and at the same time we would also like to have these what we call new technologies for proven MT approaches, which include domain tuning, incremental updates of MT systems using post-edits, kind of like instant changes of the models so that the system doesn't repeat the same mistake, etc. This came up in one of the discussions earlier on. So because it's so difficult to predict the future, we would like to capture the key factors that we have identified in the community as impacting on machine translation. We would like to have them in the core technology project, the one you see here, competing with each other using the same data sets, and through that competition share knowledge and also validate their technologies, and then send them out to the RIASes, to these application areas where these technologies, the winning technologies or the ones that are accepted, then will be validated a second time, because kind of like winning the competition, getting the best results like in a shared task is not necessarily the same as also being of the same value in a particular application scenario. So I hope that goes some way towards answering the question. So it's not we're not betting on just one horse. And we've carefully identified these 4 factors. Data is another one, really, really important. And we would like to see this happening in the technology core project on a competitive basis.
Yeah, my name is Thierry Leclerc, DFKI, and also in this case, Academy of Science in Vienna. You were talking about the difference between human translation and machine translation, and I was listening to a talk recently. They were comparing literary translation with one human translation and various machine translation. So how many human translation do we need to consider to be sure that this is a unique features of unique human translation compared to machine translation?
I'll take a stab at that. That's a good question, because that hasn't really been done to date. That really gets at the question of validity and reliability. And we're starting out for our shared task, which will be in a first attempt to address this, where we're going to be requiring at least, well, we're going to do it with assessments to start with, but we'll have at least 3 human assessments of every translation. And if we find that they diverge radically, then it probably says we need to look at bigger numbers. If they agree quite well, then that tells us maybe we don't need to do more, but we don't know yet.
I mean, maybe we could take this chance and elaborate a little on the shared task, I think, because we didn't advertise it. So we are planning in QTLaunchPad, I'm also working on the project, so we are planning to perform a shared task in 2 pieces, because this morning, also in the Gala organized panels, there has been the demand to cooperate, to talk with each other. In our shared task, in the first part, we will ask language service providers to annotate data. I mean, the way Arle just outlined, and in the second part we will give this data then to, I mean, machine translation developers and language technology experts to use this data, for example, to automatically predict error classes and do these like error estimation tasks. And so there we really want to bring both worlds together within one shared task, and of course it will then be take a little longer, because I mean there are two sequences in it. We are at the moment preparing this, and so watch out for announcements of this shared task.
I have a question which is relevant to the issue of corpus. It's a commonplace knowledge, sort of commonplace knowledge, that the quality of machine translation depends on the quality of corpus. In order for do a good training, you need good corpus. And as far as big data is concerned, certainly there is a lot of data around, but I'm thinking that how are you going to deal with the fact that the quality is actually a moving target time-wise, meaning that a lot of corpuses that are available today contain some data that is not relevant at all or bad, and some of them are good, and some of them were good some time ago, but they're not good now. So it's the knowledge changes, and the fact is that how do you plan to deal with the fact that actually the human knowledge changes over time? What was good yesterday is not good today.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So for the really large data sets, it's often based on web crawling. So there's a lot of work that Stelios' team, for example, does in QTLaunchPad on crawling data automatically from the web. That can be extremely noisy. There was a report recently was another team. They did large web-scale data collection by text for training machine translation systems. And they found that a lot of the data actually contains already machine-translated text from, these were hotel review sites, because hotel review sites try to use machine translation to make the information available, kind of like how you rate the hotel. You know, the shower was terrible, but the bar was great, or stuff like that in many, many languages. So that's a real problem. But there are some technological approaches. You can try to predict whether a text is human translated or machine translated using very similar technologies that Lucia has described. So there's some work on that. Of course, it will be noisy. You also asked about the knowledge changing. So kind of like, more recent data is often more relevant than much, much older data. And people have done quite a bit of experiments on that using Europal data, for example. If you translate the current debates, then the more recent debates that happened sort of like just a few weeks ago or a few months ago in the bytext are more relevant to that. So they used things like feature decay algorithm. It's kind of like a memory. The thing sort of like forgets some of the older stuff, and the weights go down a little bit. So there are ways of modeling that. And I don't know, expanding even more, like data cleaning is a really, really big problem. If you look at some translation memories, they're actually really awful. Because when a human uses that, it's not such a big thing, if you get sort of like a really bad thing, but if you train it, you just ignore it. If it's just commas or it's only half a translated fragment of the source string or something like this. But if you train a machine on this, it will just learn all that junk and then make your automatic translation really, really bad. And again, there's some sort of like, approximations on how you can clean this automatically without having to do this manually, but there will always be some noise. Yeah.
Let me only add one line maybe. Whereas when it comes to very generic texts, very general or across all domains, it wouldn't be so easy to quadruple, let's say, the data very fast, yeah, because Google has already applied very sophisticated means for getting data, even from Google Books, from everything, yeah, that's there, and it doesn't go up that fast right now. The cleaning is more important than the getting more data, yeah? But when it comes to, and you know this for your own companies, when it comes to dedicated areas, when we did, for instance, a survey of available parallel data for car manuals or technical specification, even the ones that are public, yeah, that are in the cars, cannot be gotten for research. That's really strange. Yeah? So you ask, for instance, the company we talk to, but every car owner in the world gets one of these. Why couldn't we get them? And they say it has to come with a car for legal reasons. We don't publish them on the web because they are slightly different in the way each car is customized. Yeah? So if we publish them and the person picks up the wrong one, so that let us look and talk to more LSPs. And it turned out that if you just were able, and sometimes it works, and with one or two companies we were successful. If you spend more time in working with the companies and telling them, see, if those are used for machine translation, it won't hurt your company, yeah? Then there are massive amount of data on specific data still in the corporations lying around that right now for legal reasons are locked up. Yeah? So that was a surprise. I didn't think so. Whereas in generic data you don't have that many. I think there's, with the help now of language service providers, we hope to get at cleaner data also. At cleaner data, then we don't have to rely on web crawling and these things so much anymore.
Piotr Fuglewicz, TIP, a small Polish company for 20 years, commercially doing things with different kinds of NLP. I do understand importance of this kind of research from the scientific point of view. It is really important to know how things are really looking like. However, I can hardly find a link between this kind of research and improvement of the overall situation on the machine translation market. And the other thing, or maybe before that, we had a discussion during the lunch where we discussed that the area is more than 60 years old, and actually there was no Copernican paradigm breakthrough or shift until then. We are just applying more and more brute force in what we are doing. So the question would be if any of you can foresee on the horizon any paradigm shift. I think it's a tough question, but I would like to know. And the other thing is we are discussing here MT as it. And I'm not involved in MT by itself. I'm involved in applications where I'm using sometimes MT. For example, lately we deployed a system where in order to have a multilingual search, we translate content to 5 languages before, because if you translate the question, you have much more disambiguities than if you translate the content and then you search in that content, even if it is translated poorly. So I lack the discussion about application of machine translation in more structured, complicated, sophisticated applications, not only to translate things.
Yeah.
But the question was about paradigm shift, rather.
Yeah, I think many good questions, more so than we can hope to address in the remaining time. I think we have a minute or something like that. But just to make one thing very, very clear, I probably underemphasized that. What I called the leitmotif, the guiding principle, is how we see this directly linking to LSPs, translation activities, the localization industry, internationalization industry. The leitmotif, remember, was what Hans presented as these translation quality bands and the barriers between those bands. And part of this idea is to move some that's over here, that's almost perfect, you know, and make that a bit better, because that's the part that is likely to be addressed by human post editors for high quality outbound translation, while not precluding the other things. And I think for the other questions, I can pass it on to.
Just one observation and one maybe a cautious prediction. The observation is, it was almost like a flashback now from Verbmobile times. In Verbmobile, we had this big, large project that we had in Germany. There were these 2 camps, the statisticians and the non-statisticians. I was among the non-statisticians, and there were among ourselves, I was wrong myself, many others too, although I had, so there were many people sitting around, and very often we got exactly these comments saying, here there's some very good work, yeah, and stable, and some people are developing things further. But then there is, in those groups with Hermann Ney, Och, and others, yeah, there is some work. There we cannot really see any application. I mean, it's crazy. You cannot do translation with that stuff, yeah. So it works maybe in a lab in a small scale, yeah. So and it reminded me. So like you're saying now about this type of work, and that's one thing. The other thing is that I think with these disruptive changes, they come from areas that you couldn't really predict that much. And a cautious prediction will be that some of the stuff will not come directly from machine translation itself. So the machine translation people, they improve their models here and there, but there is very large-scale semantics work going on that has nothing to do with machine translation. Yeah? So when I take now my other hat, and when we work, for instance, with Google and other groups on information extraction, filling the knowledge web, yeah, and doing these things, then suddenly, like in the talk by Fei Xu, then you see interactions. Then we can suddenly port something, yeah, that we have done in the semantics area, yeah, to machine and I think there will be a big thing that most machine translation people are not aware of yet. If the semanticists manage to get better at grips with big data, extracting semantics from big data, but that's a cautious prediction.
Yeah, Volker Steinmetz from RWTH University. Now I feel almost embarrassed to ask a very simple ground-to-earth clarification question. I think it's very important to strongly differentiate between the automatic evaluation measures and the human evaluation measures. I think human evaluation measures are extremely important for the end users. You are very flexible and you can find out things that are very relevant for humans. But for the machine translation community, it's extremely important to have automatic measures. And that clarification question would be, so what you presented, Arle, was all human evaluation measures, and what you presented, Lucia, was all automatic measures. Is that right? Can you comment?
Well, just very briefly on the MQM side, I didn't go into detail, but there are a number of the issue types that, at least in principle, are automatically detectable. Like, we find a term in the source, does it occur in the target? Does a parse find grammatical errors and these things? And so many of them could be automatically detected. And the idea is for research purposes where you need to very quickly see, does this make a change? That may be sufficient. To tie it in with what we're doing that are looking at human applicable features that could still be automatically detected. They might also provide a way saying, okay, we need some additional human intelligence. This will guide us to look at the parts that really matter so we don't have to look at everything. And so it's approaching the boundaries between the two.
There's also a distinction that we haven't made very clearly, which is there are automatic metrics in the standard way that most people know, which basically compare the MT output to a given one or more human translations, and they can do it in very quickly, and it's very cheap if you have a predefined set of translations that you can use. And then there are others which would be more suitable for when you don't have these references. So this is what we were talking about today. So they actually have different purposes as well. And if we can approximate what we measure by humans, by what we have with this other set of automatic metrics, that would be ideal. But of course, they're not going to be the same because we can just try and approximate that, but it's not exactly the same.
Yeah. Well and truly over time. They even switched off the microphone. We should read the signs. And just thank you for all the questions.
Thank you. Thank you to the presenters.